what is spirituality?
Well, spirituality is really helping us to understand who we are and to really unlock our full potential. Because a lot of times, people will talk about spirituality as becoming enlightened or feeling unconditional love or being at peace. But see, these are very sort of abstract viewpoints, right? What is enlightenment? It's hard for our minds to even understand what that means. And so for me, whenever I speak with people, whenever I give talks, I always say there's one thing that we've all felt, and that is actually fear, right? We've all felt fear in our lives, and we can all understand that feeling in our body when it arises. And so when we're in that fearful state, we are overcome with emotions, and then we become confused about how to do our duty. And so we take an action based on, let's say, a limited gratification, which will, over the long term, bring more suffering in our lives. So we're very afraid. We want to remove that fear, so we take a very hasteful decision. Or we freeze, right? We become like an ostrich when being attacked, takes their head and puts it in the sand, right? In hopes that nothing attacks it.
That's hilarious.
So, that's usually how we operate when we're in fear. Mm-hmm. And so the real thing about spirituality is about becoming fearless. Because when we become fearless, we have more clarity. When we have clarity, we take better decisions in our life. So all of that other stuff, enlightenment, love, those things will come. But if there's anybody out there who's saying, you know what, I want to operate from a space of fearlessness, then spirituality is for them.
So what do you feel it really takes for somebody to decide they want to devote themselves to going on a spiritual path? Because like you said, we all do experience fear. I feel like a lot of times this notion of spirituality or spiritual people is kind of like for just quiet renunciates who don't have this really tasteful experience of life and their humanity. And I've come to experience spirituality as a means, as the path for becoming on fire for life. And so, when you look at the spiritual path and someone's shift to be able to go and walk on that path, what do you see as what ignites that for most people?
So, we say that spirituality, there's only really two ways to walk the spiritual path. It's either grace or suffering. So we've suffered so much in our lives where we look at ourselves and we say, you know what, I have to change. I have to do something different. I can't continue to live this way. So unfortunately, 99% of people take that path of suffering. They've gone through some really intense moments in their lives, and they want to look at life in a different way. Then there's a few that come to it because of grace. Right? So in Sanskrit, grace is called kripa. So the literal translation means just to inspire. So grace is anything that inspires us to transform, to be lit on fire, as you put it. And so I found that it's either grace or suffering. And grace comes in many forms. It can come in the form of a book, of a teacher, of listening to a podcast. Right? There's so many different ways that grace can come in our lives that inspires us. So I'm sure there's so many people that listen to your podcast and say, you know what? I want to change. That's grace. That's that catalyst. So for me, it's either grace or suffering. Obviously, grace is a better way. And that's why we're here, right? To give modalities that helps people to transform without going through that avenue of suffering. But either way, we get to that goal, or to that, I would say, starting point of wanting to walk the spiritual path, of wanting to become fearless.
I find that in my own journey and yours and many people who start to walk on the spiritual path, it usually originates in some sort of inspiration, whether it's through their own experience or watching the experience of others. Oftentimes our own experience, where the second one, where it's suffering, born out of realizing that whatever is happening within me mentally, physically, spiritually is not a pleasurable experience of life. And the myriad of different ways in which life shows us that we are not living in alignment with our dharma, with our purpose, with how we can be vibrant. And the other option is, like you said, the grace where we, meet individuals that hold a certain level of light within them that I know in my path has been so inspiring to realize what's possible. It's like a reference point for somebody's happiness, fulfillment, presence that maybe you didn't have the experience of otherwise and didn't know was really possible. And so when we look at both and you see the suffering part of things, in many ways, do you feel like it is necessary and it is part of life that many individuals will have to suffer to come to the realization that they do need to go on a different path?
So I would say it's not necessary, but unfortunately, that's the path most of us take. Because you see, when everything is going well for you, what happens is that the ego believes I am the doer, right? I am doing this. I am responsible for all of these great things that are happening to me. So we put the ego on a pedestal. And so when the ego is on the pedestal, it's all about gratification of the senses, all about attachments and expectations. And real spirituality can't root in that. There needs to be a sense of humility. There needs to be a sense of we're all connected. There needs to be a sense of this deeper feeling that there's actually no difference between me and you. Right? In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says there's no difference between a dog eater, a priest, and a person who's just working on the street. Right? Inside, the Atma exists eternally for all of us. Right? But the ego does not allow us to perceive that, especially when things are going well. Right? And so when things start to break down, what happens is that there's a feeling of humility and understanding, you know what? Maybe I cannot control everything in my life. Because we know, we walk out on the street, you could be hit by a bus, right? Tomorrow we can have cancer, right? Who can control that? And so when that ego is hit, when things go out of our scope of control, we start to awaken to maybe there's something higher than just my limited understanding of this reality. So many people, they're not able to free themselves from that ego when everything is going great. A little bit of suffering has to sort of jolt them. So I've noticed that most people take that path. Very few have that humility, have that presence of oneness and unity without that suffering coming into their life.